Ramadan Kareem to all those who are taking part this year. Unfortunately, I will not be fasting or taking part in all that much Ramadan related this year because of health reasons, which is true most years really. I've only ever sort of half done it, but it is particularly a little bit bothersome that I can't take sort of more fully part in it as I would have done the first year I tried it. But that kind of comes into what I'm talking about here as well, and this is a very difficult subject, and yeah, because this isn't the video I wanted to make, and I was having a lot of trouble making the videos I wanted to make and put out the content I wanted to put out, and I think a lot of us are in this space. Well, it's a general thing for any sort of content creator or artist, but I think there's a space we're all kind of in right now, and especially some of us, especially of a particular generation, especially the marginalised people of a particular generation, and that is what I'm making the video of. And this is a very difficult subject, and this is not scripted like my other ones were. They were very much video essays with little bits of improv sprinkled on top. This is just me, more or less the first take, talking about this. And so this is content warnings all abound for suicidality and other things, and this is not quite about depression and not quite about suicidality, but almost like the grey space in between. And this is referencing an article I will have posted here, which I believe is entitled "Sometimes I'm Not Very Attached, the Idea of Being Alive." And I think a lot of people feel that way, and it might not be exactly sum up how I feel right now or in general about life, but it does touch on a lot of really, really painful, sort of sensitive spots that need to be addressed. Okay, so I've had a really rough day today. I've had a really rough last few years, or rough time in general, but today was a pretty hard day for me, I'm coming off a bit of a breakdown I had a couple of months ago that I still haven't somehow recovered from, and there was another breakdown before that, and yeah, it's I seem to bounce from one trauma to another, and I spend a lot of my time, my energy doing work in the community, and not that I do that to be particularly appreciated or lauded as some great savior or anything, but pouring that much energy into something, which isn't a lot overall. I know people do a lot more than I do, but because of the lack of energy I have and the difficulties I have in doing things, it's a lot for me personally. And doing this and just seeing how bad things are, it can feel very futile, pouring this energy into things and just not seeing change or not being appreciated. Or so where I'm kind of at is that I'm not kind of sure what I'm around for, what I'm working towards, what I'm put on this earth for, whatever. I felt like I had a much better grasp of it a couple of years ago than I do now, and that's very difficult. And it's particularly in my faith, because I am Muslim, and Islam is a very hope punk religion, if that makes sense. There's a saying that I'm trying to cling to right now. G. Will Olsen, who's the original writer of Miss Marvel, also wrote like Alif the Unseen. She currently has a new novel out called The Birking. You've probably heard of her if you're a big nerd. But one of the things she likes to quote is a hadith where Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, if you find the last day upon you and you find in your hand a seed or a branchless, plant the seed. So even if it's the last day, even if you think, right, tomorrow is going to be the apocalypse, and you have a seed, something for the future, like a seed is sort of the symbol of a future that has yet to be, plant it. And that sums up that sort of hope punk dimension of Islam to me, that Islam kind of recognizes that life isn't super pretty, and this is one of the difficult things, because it feeds into the theological problem of evil, which I have my own sort of solutions for that probably don't necessarily mesh that well with some traditional theology, but it's difficult reconciling those things. And that sort of links up with another quote that is, they tried to bury us, but what they did not know is that we are seeds. And that makes me think a lot, and it's a really powerful idea, and both those quotes together. But when you don't feel like you're growing into anything, it can be really difficult to cling to those ideas. And we're all part of this community. I say we're all, I mean all the people that I know in the H-bomb Discord and from various left tube communities. And we're trying to make some kind of a difference, and especially in left tube, because we're also trying to counter for the failures of places like Left Book. And Left Book is something I could go on about for ages and figures a lot into where I am now. But I don't want to be completely distracted. But yeah, we're trying to make a difference, and we have this world that might not be here in its current form in like 12 years. Like honestly, humans might exist for millennia after this, but will they look anything like what we do now? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? But things feel pretty apocalyptic right now for people of my generation, especially marginalised people of our generation, because rich people are unlikely to be affected by this. But like, as I said, I do work in the community, I do work at the Roma community and vulnerable minorities, and putting that work in and just feeling the heel of the boots sit in when you try to do anything at all, it's just feeling that small all the time really gets to you. And so that's one thing, being marginalized and being trans, being autistic and having all this shit to put up with. But then having shit I put up with from my own community, from other trans people, from, again, places like Left Book that should know better. Like, I don't even know how to get into this. I just been treated unconsciously bad. And I think this is very common with trans people. And there's a lot of things written about how trans people are treated, trans women especially, are treated in social justice communities. But as well because I'm borderline and various other things. Trans women are, and this is one of the center points of this piece, I think, that a lot of us, especially trans women, are what are called glass cannons. And this is something that I might delve into more in later videos, but a glass cannon is sort of an RPG concept. It's something that does a lot of damage, but is actually very fragile. And how that relates to trans women is that we've always traditionally made a lot of noise, but we've also collapsed under pressure pretty quickly because we're constantly dealing with a lot of shit. And glass cannons are very easy to depict as predators because, wow, they're so fierce and they go roar and they shoot you in the face with their magic missile or whatever. Actually, magic missile is not a very strikery ability, so it's not really a glass cannon, but you know what I mean. Okay, so yeah, when you are very fierce but collapse under pressure, it's easy to pitch you in a negative light because A, it fits the sort of stereotype of that you can be portrayed as exuding, and B, you can't protest so much since you will fall apart because you'll be dogpiled by horrible trolls. Or so yeah, that is the problem of the glass cannon, that you are very fierce at speaking out against things, but past a certain point you are just going to collapse, and it is very easy to frame that strength as something more than what it is, because we have these fierce sort of assaults we do, and we try to really, down with cis and all this sort of thing. But in reality, most of us fucking collapse. Like, we are, honestly, I don't want to make out that trans people are fragile, like a true sculpture made out of glass, because we're actually pretty resilient in a lot of ways. We are survivors. But because we deal with so much, like, we have everything worn down to, like, this little filaments that's left. And that can only take so much damage. It can only take so much shit. And that's the truth. So we're simultaneously very strong but very fragile because we've had to be, as my friend Nazia would put it, too strong for too long. And so much of how we are is a symptom of being too strong for too long. And the way I've been treated by some of these communities, and like, I remember in the early days, I've never been good with online forums. I've always had a bit of a problem with authority and social structures and social capital, which you probably heard Peter Coffin and friends talk about a lot, which I have my own takes on. But yeah, I've always had issues fitting in. So even before I sort of strongly identified as a marginalised person, I had these issues. And I was often told, oh, did you ever think maybe the problem was you and not everyone else? And the older I've gotten, the more I've realised the problem actually is everyone else, because that is sort of critical theory, and looking at the problems are endemic to society and systemic. And so there are definitely things I've done that are fucking stupid, and I have a lot of issues that I need to work on. But also, some people are just easy to prey on, and I'm in DBT for my borderline personality disorder, as we call it. And managing my symptoms better makes me less of a target, because people prey on me again, because borderline people can be very fierce but also very fragile. But I think some people are just always going to be marked, especially trans women, autistic women, mentally ill people, always are going to be marked for fragile people. And it's the same as how you see with like respectability politics in the US, and how people of color, especially black people, can be labeled a certain way, because again, there are many groups that are very fiercely outspoken for their rights, but also are in very precarious positions that are easy to take advantage of. And I myself have found that I found myself in that position, not just because of the obvious sort of marginalized markers, but I think there's a lot of these signifiers we have in our communities that make certain people vulnerable to mass harassment and mass rejection and alienation. And the more studies that are done on this sort of thing, on how isolation and social rejection affects us, shows it's very, very damaging. And there's a famous essay that gets bandied around a lot called Hot Allostatic Load by Porpentine. And it is very much about what happens to someone who is just constantly putting up with the sort of experiences that I've had to put up with, that are not only marginalised by wider society, but also have been marginalised by their fellow activists. And that sort of constant pressure, that sort of constant torrent of dogpiling and being torn down has an effect on your body. And that's likely why, like, I've seen a lot of these shitty right-wing stalker sites, like, have sort of circled in on the idea of fibromyalgia as this new trend for trans people and all this new sort of thing they've made up. But that's not the reason why you're seeing more people identify with that concept, is because when you put up with like abuse, and it's the thing about online abuse, is that even though it seems less sinister in the sense that it's not someone in your face, it can be so pervasive and so hard to stop, and blocks and bans and whatever can do nothing. And in fact, blocks and bans can be used against you, because that means it can just be taken behind your back, where people are manipulated against you, and that creates this incredibly scary and hostile environment, and existing within that constantly. And that just creates such immense trauma and such immense... it does really destroy people in a lot of ways, and we don't make it easier on ourselves and others. We make these hostile environments that are all about sort of repping social capital or whatever. We like virtue signaling is largely associated with the alt-right as a term, but there are a lot of people in activist communities that do genuinely do that, and that look to score points by sort of engaging in these witch hunts. And I have a lot of theories about like the idea that humans never really stopped human sacrifice. And if you look in a lot of these communities, and especially the influence of like tanky culture, like all social justice culture has this problem to an extent, and Porpentine's essays like before Left Book and before sort of tankies became as influential as they are in minority communities. But there could be an overlap there though, because back in I think the 60s, 70s, there was a group called the Weathermen, who were a group of Maoists who were probably quite influential in a lot of sort of social justice discourse that would evolve throughout then the 80s and 90s. And but yeah, anyway, that's a slightly different matter. But because we have this sort of structure of having these tankies, having these very aggressive sort of people looking to score points and be popular, and the way in which they do that is by sort of purifying the pool or whatever. Like, they're always going to be people that don't fit in for sometimes the most arbitrary fucking reasons. And a lot of time in real life, it's because you're trans, because you're a person of color, because you're Muslim, because you're disabled. And we have quite different values within Left Book, because we are trying to not be those things. Unfortunately, sometimes we are still those things. Left Book is terribly fucking ableist by expecting people to conform to these sort of standards. Like, autistic people can't make themselves available for college. Like, there'll always be one autistic person saying, oh no, I'm fine with it. And it's like, yeah, but majority of people aren't. It's terrifying dealing with these dog piles and having to be held accountable to shit that you're not even sure you actually did. And yeah, it's this sort of culture of the way in which people try to succeed socially is by tearing other people down. But particularly, it's not just that individual level of social capital, it's also trying to maintain a certain social status quo by purging people. And this is where the sort of human sacrifice, social sacrifice comes in, because people are removed in these horribly mundane ways, which I think is how Porpentine put it, and it is done with the intensity of preserving the purity of these communities, and it's sort of like a for the greater good. But a lot of the time it's very much the opposite, because it creates these atmospheres that are not nurturing, that don't focus on actual issues and are more about, again, this sort of weird social capital kind of the base system that's it's very schoolyard, and it recreates a lot of the oppressive systems on the outside, but on the inside. And a lot of the people that it claims to be helping, trans people, people of colour, disabled people, often end up being hurt the most, because the people on the end of call-outs they're really like the fucking white cis boy modmins of these groups. They're usually not them, and they, like, I might get some shit for saying this, but tankies especially have been really successful at sort of recruiting in marginalised communities, especially trans communities, a lot of people, sort of POC communities, and they've done that by convincing people that somehow, even though traditionally the regimes that they would glorify are bad on these issues, that the only way you can not be transphobic, the only way you can not be racist is to be a Leninist, and like, I don't have a problem with Leninists so much as like tankies go the whole fucking shebang, and there's been a lot of manipulation there. But yeah, this has created this culture of just struggle cults and this nastiness, and yeah, so that has led to this, like, so if I can't be this activist person, if I'm like fucked out even by those, like, if I find difficulty there, what am I here for? Because I can't, like, things aren't super sustainable for people like me right now, for people like us. Like, I'm lucky to live in a country where I'm not quite as fucked by capitalism as some others, but yeah, so that's a big part of what led me to where I am, and just being so isolated, and having lost so many friends, and like, you'd be amazed at how the way people get blacklisted, especially on Left Book, is absolutely terrifying. You can lose pretty much all your friends based on some shit. And I don't talk about exactly what happened in Left Book in the various communities that I'm in now, but it was pretty terrifying. And yeah, it basically involved me being blamed for the suicide of someone I barely knew, and that resulted in like over a year of people basically pulling me into suicide attempts. And it's not nice to think about, but I lost friends, and I had friends I should have known better betray me again to score points and to look like one of the responsible ones. But I recently confronted someone who is an infamous tanky, and I found out that they were responsible for a lot of the social engineering behind getting so many people to believe that I genuinely bullied someone to suicide. And the situation was a lot more complicated than that. It was a real fucking shitty argument where everyone was not at their best self. And again, that's going back to what I'm saying, is that we're not creating nurturing communities. And I need a nurturing community. I need purpose. I need people to propping me up, because the way I feel right now is so, like, especially because I'm borderline and I form attachments with people very strongly. And when I fall out with people, it really destroys me, and I don't have people to pick me up a lot of the time, people that really understand the depth of what it's like. And I found myself losing more people than gaining them over the last few years. I used to have such a wide network of people, and now it feels a lot smaller. People move away, they're too busy, or a few people are just plain falling out with. I found, especially with my BPD, a lot of people just moralize over it almost. They feel like, oh no, I don't have to put up with your thing and that, and they get very judgy for something that I don't have a lot of control over, and they always make sure to say, oh no, it's not because of your disability, but it's a lot of the time it really is. And that's like one of the unpretty things we don't talk about, is that we can't always be these amazing, wonderful super allies ourselves, because we are not always super in control of our shit. And yeah, sorry, my throat is kind of fucked because I have phlegm and various other problems. So yeah, so putting up with all of this has put me in a position where I'm not sure of what to do, what I should do, where I can go to get support from people. And yeah, so I spend a lot of time talking about that and Left Book and other crap, but also in general, like, I feel so little motivation to do anything nowadays. So many of the things that I love doing or felt hopeful about, that I could, like, yeah, I might get a cool new album out, or I might do this, I might do that, and even if it doesn't turn into a big thing, it is something I can do. And I find it harder and harder to actually feel like anything's worth it. And I think that's true for a lot of people in my position. And it's like, what's the point of putting out this video? What's the point of making it? Like, who's going to listen to it? Who's going to give a shit? And obviously to the saturation of these things, but I don't think that's so much it, because at least if you're making things locally for your friends and all that, like, people don't bother going to gigs as much anymore, and our culture has become more insular in really insidious ways, and it swings up and down where people rebel against that and do lots of little events. But like a system, especially here, we've been really harsh on like cutting back the arts and venues and things like that, and yeah, and that's the worst thing to cut, because, and they did a study in the UK where they showed for every pound they put into the arts, they got £1 back or £2 back, and yet they still cut the arts because it's pure austerity mentality. It's pure ideology, and Tories love their pure ideology and pretending like it's practical, and that's a very common thing on the right in general. But also, as I've gone into, we pretend that there are all these things we need to do on the left as well that actually are just harmful as well. And how can we create a nurturing environment where people actually feel like they need to exist? And this is what gets me, because like talking about people who are suicidal in these spaces, and like finding people like me who are easy to blame because we're sometimes problematic, but we're not creating environments that feel worth living in. And I don't feel like it's worth living a lot of the time, and that's horrible to say, and knowing people that I love are watching it and they're going to go, oh no, Leanna. But it's like, again, referencing that article, it's just the way a lot of people feel. We don't feel like living is super awesome times a lot of the time, and like I do have my up days, I do have my down days. Like, my life is definitely better now than it was before transition, like easily, even with all the rise of fascism and bullshit. At least I have a chance to fight things on my own terms, which I don't feel I did before I started HRT, before I started transition. That was shit. It was not very good. Like before that I had like some good days, but not a lot, whereas now I do have regular good days, which is amazing. And I try to revisit those old times a bit more, because I realized there was a lot of like trying to reconcile the image of me. And this is one of the things with trans people, and even with autistic people, because we can often be slower to develop, is that we don't recognize our past selves. We don't identify with our past selves very well, and trying to do this thing of synthesis, as we talk about in DBT, is big on dialectics, which I guess makes it very Marxist. It's an immortal science, and so trying to resolve myself now with my past self is something I've tried to do to ward off depression. Like things that I did when I was like not quite myself were still things I did in general. Like I was still me to some degree, and like trying to absorb a lot of that back and trying to like recontextualize all the memories as maybe happier as I may have felt at the time, and trying to look at a lot of how I feel about gender, and like even though I wasn't presenting a certain way, that I was still more myself than I realized. But that shit's hard, and it's, again, I didn't have a lot of genuinely happy memories going back then, and so you look to the future, and the future is Nazis and global warming. So well, maybe the Nazis are slightly on their way out in some places, a bit more on their way in others. Even if we get on top of that shit, like, is it too late? What are we going to do? I don't know. But maybe talking about the global situation, which doesn't affect me as much, but it is hard to disconnect from that, though. Like, looking at things, like, because I know a lot of people from a lot of different places, so when I see shit happening in Palestine, I see shit happening in the US, even though I'm in Ireland and sheltered from a lot of that shit, like, I know people from there. I know some people that I actually give a shit about, and I don't mean to say that, like, I don't mean to take their issues as mine, because I know that's a very problematic thing in of itself, but I think that it is a good thing that we do have that level of solidarity, and I think there is more solidarity there to be had than places like Left Book and sometimes overly aggressive lane discourse would have you believe. And again, that's part of creating a nurture environment where we still need to be mindful of people talking about their own shit, and also how we can still sort of cross those lines and support each other. But like right now, I don't know what would help, what would make me feel like it's worth doing things, because like what do I have to look forward to? And this was something like I'm a little less cynical about certain mass media things. Like I was looking forward to Endgame, and I mostly enjoyed Endgame, but then after it's like, well, what now? Like wait for the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover for DC shows. I don't know. It's like that sort of depression that you get after completing a creative project or finishing a series. I feel that depression a bit more all the time now, and it's like, maybe it's because it feels like, oh well, everything is ending. This is the end now. I'm not sure how I'm going to move on. Um, that weird feeling. I don't know if there's a word for that. I hope there is, and I can use it in future videos. But yeah, it's just that lingering sort of sense of dread, I guess, or emptiness, and it's not nice to talk about. But how can you make anything better if you don't talk about it? And I don't know how to make it better, and how to feel like it's worth. Like, I tried to channel all my misery and anxiety into this video, and it has made me feel a little bit lighter about things, which is good. And I think, like, your anger is a gift, and we should take all this misery and anger and refine it into something positive instead of just these horrible fucking left book communities. And I think this is one of the reasons why I kind of believe in LeftTube. I know it's not perfect, and it can be prone, and I can be prone to celebrity worship and all that. And I think it's good to have role models. I'm not totally against the idea of having some people that do actually speak up on these issues and are well known for that. But we do definitely need to collectivize more, because we are socialist guys, and most of us anyway. And we do need to check in on each other more, maybe. And like, this is one of the things I love about the H-Bomb Discord, that we have a self-care channel and all this stuff, and it does kind of feel like people have each other's backs, and it's nice. And like, even Harry himself, he checks in on me, and that's like amazing, because like, it's like, who the fuck am I to him? And he just saw me going through a lot of stuff, like fighting TERFs and all that one day, and yeah, and that's really cool. So mad shout outs to Harry, H-Bomber guy, and everyone in that Discord for being pretty damn great, to be honest, and like overcoming all those fucking parasocial barriers. And yeah, but yeah, that is a downside too as well, that there is this, for those of us that are starting out on LeftTube or BreadTube, whatever, that those sort of parasocial vibes can be kind of there, and like we feel like, yeah, we're doing this now, we're one of the guys and or gals, or there should be a proper non-binary version of guys. That would be really nice. But yeah, so yeah, getting into where I feel like, yeah, I would really like to be able to do something with what I'm doing right now. But I'm not even 100% sure as what I should be doing. I've been an activist for a very long time now, and I've been looking for avenues to get my voice out, and Left Book obviously wasn't that, and a lot of real life stuff was very difficult, because again, there's always trans community drama, because we're small here in Ireland, and there's some people who've been really fucking abusive shits to me, and I've gotten away with it, and I've dealt with Islamophobia and other issues. There's been some people that have been great too, like sorry, Sarah from Tiny and a few other people. But yeah, it's been genuinely really hard. So trying to do something on my voice, I've gone talks at conferences and events and other things. But yeah, is this what I should be doing? Should I be doing social justice shit, or should I be taking a step back because it's burnt me so badly? Should I be working on my music again? Should I be working on comics, writing? And like, how do you get your leg in the door at any of these? Because nothing of what I do really fits into the regular capitalist mode of doing shit. And that's the one thing this article that talks about regular sort of passive suicidality doesn't talk about. It is because of capitalism and the isolation that comes with the modern sort of late capitalist age and neoliberalism. That's what causes it. It's not social media, or although that figures into it, but it's the neoliberal models of social media. And yeah, that causes this isolation. That is the whole concept of isolation, and alienation especially is a huge part of like leftist theory. So how can we beat that? How can we beat alienation? I don't know, but I feel pretty isolated and pretty alienated most of the time. Yeah, so trying to find my purpose, what I want to do, and that is, on one level, that's a very capitalistic thing, like, what do I want to do? I always have to be productive, but on the other hand, I want to do stuff I enjoy. I want to feel like I matter anyway. So even if we had the revolution, like, tomorrow, lads, and then Cheeky Nando's after, it'd still be like, okay, what the fuck do I do now? So it's finding my own self-worth. It's like, that's a much deeper sort of spiritual journey, I guess, and something I'll be thinking a lot during Ramadan when I can fast. And yeah, so I don't know. So I'd love to hear about other people dealing with this sort of lingering thing, and how can we turn this into something positive. And yeah, so that's it. That's the video. And yeah, so if you'd like to help out with my endeavors, I do have a little PayPal me, and yeah, so Until next time, hopefully I'll feel a little bit better, and hopefully you'll all feel wonderful too. So, mwah.